So a few years ago, I was running a lot. I trained for a marathon. I did a marathon. I was so stoked about it. And then I was playing basketball with some friends. And I went up, if you know who Kobe is, I went for like a Kobe Bryant fadeaway. And I landed on my friend's foot. And I totally just destroyed my ankle. And I went to the doctor. It was purple, it was black, it was really yucky, really swollen. I had to drive home after, like there's no way of getting home, and that's not the safest thing. Anyhow, not part of the story. I went to the doctor, and I got ultrasound. He said, look, John, like you probably don't need physio, so we trust doctors, don't we? I trusted my doctor, and I didn't go and do any rehab, physio. And so I just sort of left it for 6 months, and I tried starting to run again, and because the swelling had gone down, but when you have an injury and you don't fix it, you start to compensate because you don't have the mobility. And so as soon as I started running, I got a tendonitis in my right Achilles tendon. It was so painful, but I was like, I've been off for 6 months. I'm just going to keep running and push through the pain. And hopefully once I just push through, it will just heal itself. It will become better all by itself. And literally every time I would run, I wouldn't be able to walk properly for the next, couple days. Like it was really painful. And I just thought, I'm not going to and I just chose not to engage into any activities like physio that will actually fix it. I just kept doing what I thought was best. I just thought I will just ride it out and it will be okay. I'll just ride it out and eventually it will come around good. I learned a very valuable lesson. When we want a turnaround in our life, when things need a turnaround, when things aren't going well, you just can't ride it out. You have to engage in activities that will actually give yourself a chance at a turnaround. And many of you in this room or watching online, you have faced, or you are currently facing, or you will face a situation where you need a turnaround. Maybe it will be in some sort of leadership capacity. Maybe it will be in your families. Maybe it will be financially. Maybe it will be your marriage. Maybe it will be your personal life. And those are just the ones that I've sort of dealt with. But we all, at some point in our life, will need a turnaround in our life. We'll need to navigate a turnaround. And in this series, we're going to unpack an ancient story that has time-tested wisdom that will help you turn around just about anything. So we're going to be looking at this story. I want you to shout it out if you know who this is. Anybody? Shout it out. It's all right. Yes, it doesn't really match your VeggieTales version of Jonah, does it? But we're going to be unpacking the story of Jonah for the next 3 weeks. And this is from a monastery in Greece, this painting of Jonah. It's a fierce-looking whale. And fun fact, I learned something this morning. Mr. Stephen Fruinlord told me that in a town in New South Wales, which is called Eden, there was a man, we assume he was a man, that was swallowed by a whale and survived the whole thing. Did you all know that? Yeah, so there was like a real Jonah and the whale in like Australia. I don't know what year that was, but it actually happened. They went to a museum that had the story. 2001. That's when you went. It's relevant. It's perfect. Yeah. So just so you know, they went in 2001 and they heard about the story in 2001. Anyhow, not part of it. But the reason why I say that is because skeptics and people that are trying to criticize the Christian faith or the Bible will often turn to the story of Jonah as a reason to say that it's not true. They'll use it to debunk the Christian faith because they say it's not historical, like it's not a historical document. And Christians, we spend so much energy and time defending it as if it's a historical document. Now, there's sort of two sides of the coin here, and I'm not going to go into this, but it is a historical document, and we take it word for word just as is, or it's written in more of a parable, fable type of writing, and we should take it as a parable. And so what happens, though, is we sort of miss the whole point of the story because we're too worried about what kind of writing is it? Is it a historical document? And because what you need to know is the Bible is not a book. The Bible is a collection of books, and each book has its own different literary style of writing. And so people will say that the story of Jonah, the book of Jonah, is from a fable or a parable style of writing. And then we miss the whole point. It's a waste of energy because it's a flawed approach to the text. Because if you can look past whether it's a parable or whether it's a historical document, if you can look past it, there are some principles within it that will help you navigate just about anything, navigate a turnaround in just about anything. And I just want to say that I'm not saying that this isn't true. I'm not saying that the story of Jonah isn't true. In fact, I'm saying more like the complete opposite of that. That the story is so unbelievably true. That it's like more true than true. Like the principles and what we can take from it, and I'll get to that in a minute, it's unbelievable, relevant, and true. And the style of writing that the book of Jonah is written in is satire. And the closest thing that I can think about satire is Saturday Night Live. Anybody watch Saturday Night Live? We don't have to put hands up. And what they do is they take a humorous portrayal of something ridiculous in order to embarrass, humble, or discredit, or correct. And what seems to be the most unbelievable thing about the story of Jonah is Jonah being swallowed by a whale and then surviving the whole thing, right? For a lot of people looking at the story of Jonah, we think that is just very unbelievable. And the story is filled with humor. It's filled with repetition. It's filled with exaggeration and sarcasm. It's really a literary work of art. And second thing that we need to know about the story of Jonah is that it's very common to embrace a principle from a metaphorical story, right? And if you say you've never done it, let me just say, have you ever heard this before? Hands up if you've heard slow and steady wins the race. Yep, okay. None of us embrace slow and steady wins the race because a tortoise beat a hare, right? We believe that if you are faithful and you have discipline over a long period of time, you will get to where you need to go. Not because a tortoise beat a hare. That's not why we apply that story to our life. Okay, again, I'm not saying that the story isn't true. I'm saying it's beyond true. I'm saying that it's superior to what we think about when we think about a true story. And the story of Jonah, it's a very old story. It was a story that would have been told for generations before it was even documented in what we call the Bible. And what they do is they take the most rich and the most meaningful parts of that document, and that is what survives into what we have, which is the book of Jonah. And the story of Jonah and what remains from those stories being told from generations to generation, it's deep in meaning, it's deep in metaphor, and it's deep in insight. It's a representation of a time-tested foundational truth. And it's extremely practical when you need to navigate a turnaround in your life. So I'm just going to give you quick context into the story of Jonah. The story of Jonah, it's people will say it's either a prophetic book or it's a historical book, but most books most books about a prophet, Jonah is a prophet. Most books about a prophet are about God's word speaking through the prophet. The story of Jonah is the only book about a prophet that is actually about the prophet. Are you following? So there's multiple different prophetic books, and most of them, all of them except for Jonah, are about God speaking through the prophet. The story of Jonah is the only one that is actually about the prophet. And its structure is like a 2-act play. It's a 2-act play that has 2 scenes. So there's 4 books, there's 4 chapters total, Act 1, Act 2, Scene 1, and C2. And so in chapters 1 and in chapters 3, so Scene 1 of Act 1 and Act 2, there's so many parallels. The word of the Lord comes to Jonah. Are we following? So you got Act 1, Act 2, Scene 1, which is chapter 1 in Act 1 and chapter 3 in Act 2. The word of the Lord comes to Jonah, and there is an external turmoil that happens. Okay, so the word of the Lord comes to Jonah. There's an external turmoil. And then in scene 2 of Act 1 and scene 2 of Act 2, Jonah cries out. He cries out to the Lord, and then we see some more of an internal turmoil. And today, we're going to talk about Act 1, Scene 1. And remember, it's a satire and almost comical tragedy that happens. I'll show you why. The word of the Lord, so Yahweh, the God of Israel, came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Okay, and so when this is being written down, I mean, the people would have already known because they've heard the story for generations before it was written down. So the Lord, whenever you see the Lord, that's Yahweh, the God of Israel, came to Jonah. The name Jonah means dove, and doves are equated to peace, right? Jonah, so the peaceful man, son of Amittai, which means faithful. So this is already setting up some sort of comical style of writing. Because if they know what happens next, they know the story of Jonah. We know the story of Jonah. We know that he probably wasn't the most innocent and following a faithful tradition. Okay? And so the audience knows what's coming, and this is what comes next. So the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the peaceful, the son of someone extremely faithful. Go to the city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. This is what the Lord is telling Jonah to do. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish or Tarshish. I'm going to call it Tarshish. There's different pronunciations. The one that I think is correct is Tarshish. So he went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Okay, this is not something where it's just an accident. He didn't just accidentally make a wrong turn and get his navigation, his map not correct. That's not what happened. I got a map just to show you what actually happened. So we've got Israel. To get our bearings, we got Italy, we got Spain, we got like Greece, we got Israel, and down here is Joppa. Okay, so he's gone down to Joppa, and the Lord said, hey, can you go to Nineveh? Can you go to Nineveh? And he goes, nope. He goes all the way over to Tarshish. Okay, it's not just a random misstep. That's like me saying I'm going to go to Ingham, and I end up going to Perth. Right? Like, it's just not even close. So this is a very deliberate thing. And why didn't he just go to Nineveh? Well, it doesn't actually tell us. Later on it does, but there's some theories that there's this unrest, and it would have actually been almost patriotic for Jonah not to go to Nineveh, because there was this, they were getting invaded and held siege, and Israelites were just being taken and deported. Like, it was just not a nice thing. And if he didn't go to Nineveh, God's like, and we'll just wipe it all out. And the people the Israelites were like, okay, so maybe don't go there. So that can actually happen. The second reason is, let's just put ourselves in this story, okay? Let's put ourselves in this story. Would you rather go to the northern mountains in Iraq or the coastal land of Spain? Like, where would you rather go? I think I'm going to Spain like every single time, right? So there's different reasons as to why we can't just read over these things. We have to give context as to why Jonah did the things that he did. And this decision for Jonah to go from Israel down to Joppa, it begins a series of events that is a downward spiral. It's a downward spiral. And Jonah begins to go down to Joppa, aboard or down into the ship. He goes down to Joppa, down into the ship. And why am I emphasizing down? Because this is like a representation of the words that we say when things aren't going well in our life. Right? Things are looking down for me right now. I'm down on my luck. Things aren't looking up. Things are looking down. And so Jonah, he went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for the port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Okay, so I'm going to give you some diagrams so we can get, next slide, please. So he goes from down to Joppa and down aboard the ships. And these are the things that we normally say when things aren't going well. There's this downward spiral based on the choices that Jonah is making. There's this downward spiral in his life that he's finding it very difficult to get out of. So then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break. It's as if the ship had a personality, and it's like, if this storm comes anymore, I'm just going to blow up on you. Like, that's sort of how it's written here. And all the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to its own god. So all the pagans were crying out to their own gods. They were all looking up, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten this ship. So they were all crying out to different gods, and they were desperate and dumping cargo. And the irony is that they're all looking up while Jonah is down. Right? They're all looking up while the only prophet on the ship, the only one that is like a prophet of the God, the Yahweh, the Lord, he is down and he is ignoring what's going on. They're doing the opposite to Jonah. And that's sort of the comical style satire writing, right? Everyone is doing the opposite of what we think they should do. Can you see that? The sailors, the pagan, they're all looking up at their own gods, while Jonah, the prophet of the Lord, the Yahweh, is down. But Jonah, he'd gone below deck, where he laid down and fell into a deep sleep. So he's gone down to Joppa, he's gone down aboard the ship, he's gone down below deck, he has laid down, and he's fallen into a deep sleep. So there continues this downward spiral that Jonah is going through. Sorry, these slides have a little bit of delay on them because of the artwork. There we go. So he's gone down to Joppa, down aboard the ship, down below deck, he lays down into a deep sleep. And so what's going on here? There's this downward spiral, and the pattern is something like this. Jonah chooses to defy what God has asked him to do, right? He's chose to defy what he ought to do. He is not doing what he should do. And then he tries and does things on his own strength, on his own intuition. So he's defied, and now he's trying to do it on his own. And then to escape the fallout, he goes and hide. So at this point, Jonah is the only one that knows why the storm is there. He has a secret that he's holding on to. He has a secret that he doesn't want anyone else to find out. He's got a secret, and he's trying to do whatever he can to make sure that nobody else can find out what that is. He's the only one that knows what's going on and why it's going on. And then Jonah lays down. And that's sort of a representation. He's trying to survive. He's trying to survive the fallout of his actions. It's his actions, his decisions, his choices that has put him into this situation, and there are consequences for his actions, and now he is trying to just wait it out. He's trying to ride it out. He's trying to survive the fallout. And then finally, he closes his eyes and goes into a deep sleep, which is like choosing to ignore that it ever happened. He's denying that it even happened. And there's this downward spiral that leads into a situation where we need a turnaround. There's this spiral that it's all connected, that he's defied what God has asked him to do. He's not doing what he ought to do, and now he's trying to fix it all on his own, but then he can't, and so he's going to hold that secret. He's going to hide, and then he's going to try to survive the fallout or the consequences, and eventually you just deny that, hey, it's not that bad. It's not that bad, is it? I haven't done anything wrong. I'll just ride it out and everything will be okay. And this spiral pattern is what plagues relationships. It's what plagues your marriages. It plagues your organizations or your teams or your careers or your finances. or your mental health, or your emotional health. And you've likely seen this pattern in a friend, or a spouse, or a partner, or a coworker, or an employee, or a boss, or your kids, maybe your parents. This downward spiral, many of us have acted out this pattern in our own lives. Many of us have acted out this pattern in our own lives. We think we're going to try out something in our own strength, in our own intuition. I'm not going to do what I ought to do. In fact, I'm going to do what I ought not to do. I'm going to do what I know I'm not meant to do. And when it doesn't go well, we try to hide it and we try to cover it up. And then we're left to survive the follow or consequences. And we end up stuck in a situation and we can't get out of it. So we deny it. We can't get out of it, so we deny it. And so as scene 1 continues, there's this confrontation between Jonah and the ship captain. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God," right? Because they've all called on their gods and the storm is still happening. So they don't know that Jonah's the reason, but they're like, "Jonah, you're the only one that hasn't called on your God. You've been asleep. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish." Right? So ironically, there's so much irony in this story. Ironically, the prophet is the only one not praying to his God. And the shipmaster is saying, "Wake up. Get up. You got to wake up to what's going on around you. You got to get up." Why? Because this is the first step to a turnaround. When you're needing to turn something around in your life, this is the first step. You got to wake up. We've got to get up. It begins, navigating a turnaround begins by waking up. Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." And this is like drawing straws. They want to see if the gods will show them who's responsible. They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah, so they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What's your country? From what people are you?" It's like, "Jonah, we don't know much about you, but there's something clearly going on here. There's something more going on than meets the eye." And this is the way it typically goes, right? When we get a sense of who's responsible, or when someone's caught, maybe when you're caught, we have a lot of questions because we want them to own up to what's going on. We want them to own up to what's going on. So Jonah replies, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." And this terrified them. And they asked, "What have you done? Why have you done this?" They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. But they're saying to Jonah, "Okay, so just to be clear, you worship the God of the land and the sea. And you defied him, you went against what he has, and you thought it was a good idea to come out onto the sea, which he is the God of the land and the sea. And you went on a boat on the sea, not just any boat, but you came on our boat. Like, Jonah, how dumb are you? Why? Like, that just doesn't make sense." And so the story continues. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" And he replies in such a Shakespearean way. He says, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and it will become calm, and I know that it's my fault that this great storm has come upon you. I will be the sacrificial lamb." No, that's not what actually happens. Jonah is not being heroic. He's looking for a way out. He is looking for a way out. He doesn't want to face what's happening. He doesn't want to face the fallout of the choices that he's made. He can't face the consequences. It's too overwhelming. So he says, throw me overboard, it's too much for me. Throw me overboard, it's too much for me. Throw Jonah overboard, it's too much. And Jonah cannot take the responsibility. He cannot face the responsibility because he's found himself in an overwhelming place. And I just want to pause here for a minute. If this is you today, where you feel the weight of this story, you can relate to Jonah, that it's just too much to face. It's too much. I just want you to know, like you've been carrying the burden alone. Just want you to pay attention for this part. I want you to know that I've been praying that you would be here today. I've been praying that you would be here, that you'd be listening to this message, that you would be watching this message. I believe it's no accident. I believe that this is the providence and the kindness of God that you are here today. And if I could be so forward, I'm not a prophet, I don't talk on behalf of God, but I believe God is saying to you, it's time for a turnaround. It's time for a turnaround. I'm inviting you and offering to help you navigate this turnaround. Before the storm gets too vicious, before the storm gets too big, before the storm is too crazy that it takes you out, or it takes someone that you care about out. I would so glad that you're here. And it is not too late to begin to navigate a turnaround in your life. If you can relate to the downward spiral of Jonah, where you know you're not doing what you ought to do, or you're doing what you ought not to do, and you've been trying ever since to do it your own way, and you've got a secret that you've been hiding, that you've been hanging on to, that you don't want anyone to find out, and you've just been trying to survive the fallout, and you've now just ignored it like no one's finding out, it's all okay. It's fine. Life goes on. You've denied it. It's not too late for a turnaround. And I prayed that you would be here today listening to this message. And nothing that the enemy wants more is to you feel like you are the only one in that situation. Church, I promise you, you are not. You are not. It is not too late to begin to navigate the turnaround. And so Jonah is in this situation where it's overbearing, it's overwhelming. He can't face reality. He can't face the consequences. And so he says, throw me overboard. But the men didn't want that for Jonah. The men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. So they cried out to the Lord, please, Lord, right? This is like their first time. They all have their own gods, and now they're calling out to Yahweh, the God of Israel. They cried out to the Lord, please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, and we have done as you have pleased. So these non-Israelites are trying to discern what the Lord is telling them they ought to do. And they're going, our best understanding, Lord, is that you're communicating to us that we should throw Jonah overboard. But in case we are misunderstanding what you're trying to say, just have mercy on us. But this is what we think you're trying to say. So they took Jonah and they threw him overboard. And the raging sea grew calm. And at this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. So these paganistic, non-Israelite people, men, have their come to Jesus moment when a prophet was screwing up his life. And so they do what they ought to do. So God rescues them, and then they worship him. A turnaround in our life always begins with a reversal of your current behavior. Jonah's behavior is all downwards facing. Everything's going down. And things are looking down, if you can relate to this. There's this spiral and this trend. And to begin a turnaround in our life, we need to change our current behavior. We can't just ride it out. Things don't just get better on their own. There needs to be a change of behavior. So the first thing that the shipmaster says to Jonah, when Jonah is down under the ship falling asleep, he says, you got to wake up. You got to wake up, open your eyes to what's really going on. You got to wake up. And then after you wake up, you got to look up. We've all been looking up. The shipmasters were saying, you got to look up. You got to call on God because you need his help and his strength to navigate this turnaround in your life. You got to wake up. You got to look up. And finally, the most difficult of all, Jonah, you got to own up. You got to own up. Own up to what's going on. You need to tell somebody. You need to be honest about what's going. Stop denying it. You've got to wake up. You've got to look up. You've got to call on God for his strength, and then you've got to own up. And here's why this is the first step for us to navigate a turnaround in our life. You cannot get to where you know you need to be until you can understand where you actually are. When you're driving with Google Maps or Apple Maps, there's no use trying to get to your destination if you don't know where you are on the map, right? You got to know where you are in order to get to where you want to be. And so, at the risk of getting all up in your business, the question that I have for you, what do you need to wake up to? What do you need to own up to? What do you need to open your eyes to? What have you not been doing that you know you ought to? Or what have you been doing that you know you should not be doing? Have you been unethically or immorally, have you been acting unethically or immorally for like your own gain and your own benefit? Have you been engaging in a relationship that's been leading you down the wrong direction? Have you been medicating or escaping through an unhealthy habit or vice? The first step for us to navigate a turnaround is you need to wake up. You need to open your eyes to what's actually going on. What do you need to wake up to? What is it? Can we go to the next slide, please? And I don't want us to leave here today without having a practical application that is actually going to lead to change. Just like my running injury, I couldn't just keep doing the same thing because it just kept getting worse and worse. When we ignore and deny and hide in order to survive what's going on in our life, it might be going okay for a little bit, but eventually that mess is going to come out and the storm is going to rage even stronger than it did before. So what do you need to wake up to? What do you need to wake up to before the storm takes you out? Here's how you can practically take a step. This week, I want you to choose a trusted friend. You need to tell them what you need to wake up to. Tell a trusted friend that will look up and draw on God's strength with you, for you. Tell a friend who you need to wake up to and who you need to, and what you need to own up to. If you don't have that friend or you're not ready for that yet, again, I don't want you to miss this opportunity. You can scan this QR code and there'll be a form that you can just write what you need to wake up to. And we've got a team of people that will look up to God with you and for you and pray for you every single day this week. You can do that anonymously, or if you want, you can write your name and somebody from that team will meet with you and pray with you and navigate the turnaround with you. Maybe your story isn't as drastic and dramatic as Jonah. Maybe you're not at a Jonah moment, but there are things in your life that you know you need to change. There are things in your life that you know you're on the downward spiral, that you need a change of behavior to start looking up. We all need a captain in our lives to say, wake up, look up, own up. There's probably a step for all of us here today. Whether you're at the level of Jonah or it seems a little bit smaller, however big or however small, there's an opportunity for us to wake up and change the direction of our life. And I want to pray that if there is someone that is moving in the wrong direction, that God will use somebody to begin that turnaround in your life. That God will use somebody to be that captain in your life, to encourage you and to challenge you to wake up because they see which direction your life and your pattern of behavior is going. What do you need to wake up to? Let's not miss that opportunity. We'll keep this QR code on for a little while after the church, after the service, and I just know that there's a team of people that would love to engage in prayer with you. God, we thank you that we can take stories like Jonah and apply timeless principles into our life. Because really, Father, we're not much unlike Jonah, where we defy what you ask us to do. We go in the complete opposite direction of what we know you want us to do. And we keep trying and trying and trying to do things on our own strength and our own intuition, and it's exhausting, and we end up just laying down and closing our eyes because it's too hard. God, I pray for those out there that know they need a shift, a change in behavior, a different direction, God, that there would be courage and boldness to go to that friend and to invite them into this journey of navigating a turnaround in our lives. That you would give us such incredible humility to own up to what we've been doing or what we've not been doing. Thank you for Jesus, for his unconditional grace. God, that he already paid the price. He paid the price for our shortcomings, for our sin. And we have the opportunity to respond to that and to get our lives in order with the most caring and loving Heavenly Father we could ever ask for. God, I pray that today would be the start of a turnaround for somebody or somebodies in this room. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.